gale-force winter winds whipping through my hair.
Then you better do it right. Use my Uncle Ben's. Rice is rice.
Taste, and I knew which ketchup I liked best.
They were the flavors of our childhood. Bright boxes, bold jingles, and forbidden treats that vanished without a trace. What really happened to the food we loved, and why does it feel like losing more than just a snack? There was nothing quiet about the way Quisp cereal burst into childhood. Its electric pink box and the little alien mascot with a propeller on his head felt like Saturday morning wrapped in sugar. The cereal was sweet, corn-based, and shaped like flying saucers, a perfect match for its intergalactic branding. In the 1980s, this was not just food, it was an identity. It lived next to action figures, cartoons, and color TV. But as tastes shifted, Quisp began losing its ground. Its twin cereal rival Quake had already disappeared earlier, and Quisp slowly followed, becoming harder to find. The cereal aisle was transforming. Health trends, fancier brands, and less sugary options muscled out the weird and wonderful. Kids grew up, the mascot faded, and Post stopped pushing it. The strange part is, Quisp never officially died. It would reappear in limited batches or online like a ghost from a breakfast past. But by the time the world logged on, Quisp had already been forgotten by most. You would be hard-pressed to find a younger millennial who even knows what it tasted like. For a cereal that once claimed to be the quasi-energy cereal, Quisp's quiet fade-out is almost too poetic. A sugar-fueled dream, lost to time and trend. You could spot it a mile away, the tall, slim pink can with the word Tab screaming from the side. For a generation of women in the 1980s, Tab was more than just a diet soda. It was marketed like a lifestyle. Drink Tab, stay thin, be modern, that was the fantasy. And it worked. Its saccharine taste and strange chemical afterglow didn't matter. You drank it because your mom did, because your aunt kept a case in the garage, because it felt like rebellion in a can. But Tab's magic began to wear off by the end of the decade. Coca-Cola launched Diet Coke, and suddenly, Tab looked old, outdated, forgotten. It limped along through the 1990s, more of a relic than a brand. In some regions, it vanished quietly. In others, it clung on thanks to loyalists who refused to let go. But eventually, even the diehards gave up. When Coca-Cola discontinued Tab in 2020, it was almost a formality. The real death happened long before that. It was when the last pink can sat warm and lonely on a dusty shelf, waiting for someone who no longer remembered the taste. Tab wasn't just a diet drink. It was a promise. One we outgrew, or maybe one that outgrew us. They were weird. That was the best thing about them. Pizza Spins were these crunchy little wheels that tasted sort of like pizza, but mostly like processed cheese dust and oregano. They came in a yellow-orange box that looked like it belonged on a toy shelf, not the snack aisle. And for kids in the late 1970s and early 1980s, that was a green light. General Mills knew exactly who they were selling to. It was not about gourmet flavor, it was about novelty. Pizza you could eat with your fingers during cartoons. But novelty only lasts so long. And by the mid-1980s, Pizza Spins had spun their last. Nobody really knows the exact year they vanished. They just stopped showing up. Other snacks, more refined or more familiar, took their place. Parents began looking at ingredients. School vending machines started banning certain things. Pizza Spins were not built for that world. Still, if you ask someone who remembers, their eyes light up. Not because they were good, but because they were ours. A snack that tried something weird, something fun, and did not ask for permission. The world forgot about Pizza Spins, but the kids who crunched them after school, they remember. Peanut butter fans thought they had found heaven. PB Max was chunky, messy, and unapologetically loud. A thick slab of peanut butter on a cookie base, all drenched in milk chocolate. It had all the makings of a legend. And for a short while in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was just that. You would see it in gas stations, in vending machines, in your friend's lunch. It stood out from the crowd. It tasted like rebellion. But then, like a cruel trick, PB Max disappeared. People wrote letters, sent complaints, asked where it went. The answer? Mars executives apparently just did not like peanut butter. That was it. That was the reason. The product was successful, profitable, and beloved, but it did not match the personal taste of the family behind the company. So they pulled the plug, just like that. No announcement, no farewell tour, just silence. It is the kind of decision that makes you realize how fragile even your favorites are. PB Max did not fail because people stopped loving it. It failed because someone decided it did not deserve to exist. And in that, there is something deeply upsetting. A snack that won hearts, but not boardrooms. It glowed like nuclear waste and tasted like citrus sugar and ghosts. High-C EctoCooler was not just a juice box, it was a phenomenon. Slapped with the green face of Slimer from Ghostbusters, it rode the wave of 1980s pop culture straight into kids' lunchboxes. For many, this was the crown jewel of cafeteria trading. One sip, and you were instantly cooler. Parents bought it for peace, kids drank it for power. But then the movies stopped, the cartoons dried up, and without its pop culture engine, EctoCooler slowed to a crawl. In the late 1990s, it was rebranded under different names, but it was never the same. The color changed, the taste faded. By the early 2000s, it was gone. And yet, people never let it go. Fan campaigns begged for its return. It popped up again for a brief moment with the Ghostbusters reboot in 2016, like a ghost of its former self. But that did not last. EctoCooler's magic was tied to a time, a vibe, a feeling you cannot mass-produce anymore. It was artificial, yes, but it was also real in the way it made us feel, like summer break in a box, gone, but never quite dead. The commercials were insane, giant fruit crashing down on people's heads as they chewed candy and grinned like maniacs. Bonkers, fruit chews were a direct attack on boring snacks. Each piece had a tangy outer shell and a soft fruity inside. They were fun to say, fun to eat, and perfectly engineered for the 1980s sugar rush. You could find them everywhere: convenience stores, lunch lines, corner stores with sticky floors. Then one day they were gone. No farewell, no explanation. Just gone. Some say the flavors were too bold. Others say the market shifted toward more subtle, health-conscious candy. Either way, Bonkers was a casualty of changing times. What made it great, its ridiculousness, was also what made it unsustainable. You will not find Bonkers in stores today. But if you mention them to the right person, you will see their eyes widen. They will smile and say something like, "I forgot all about those." And for a moment, they will be back in the world of neon shoelaces and arcades, gripping a candy that made no sense but all the difference. Bonkers did not just vanish. It exploded and left a gap nothing ever quite filled. Fruit roll-ups were weird. Pudding roll-ups were weirder. A strip of chocolate pudding in the same sticky, peelable format. Kids were intrigued. Parents were confused. It looked like candy but was marketed as a snack. Texture-wise, it lived somewhere between fruit leather and Play-Doh, and that might be why it failed. Still, for a few brief years in the late 1980s, it became a bizarre staple in school lunches. You could find it in trade deals between Lunchables and juice boxes, but it never caught on the way fruit roll-ups did. People just did not know what to make of it. Was it dessert? Was it healthy? The packaging could not decide either. Eventually, it vanished, discontinued quietly like a secret never meant to be shared. You might think you imagined it, but no, it was real. The problem was, nobody knew how to explain it, not even Betty Crocker. And in a world obsessed with convenience and clarity, that was enough to get you pulled from shelves. Pudding roll-ups were too odd to survive. But for those who remember, they live on as proof that companies once took strange, delicious risks. And sometimes that was enough. Before Pop-Tarts ruled the toaster, there were Danish go-rounds. A rolled-up pastry, spiraled with fruit filling, made to pop right out of the toaster and into your hand. It was flaky, it was warm, and it was easy. Kellogg's launched them in the late 1960s, but they reached their peak in the 1980s when toaster pastries became an American breakfast ritual. but something about them never fully stuck. Maybe it was the shape, less neat than a Pop-Tart. Maybe it was the taste, more delicate, less sugary. Whatever it was, Danish go-rounds slowly vanished. Pop-Tarts became the juggernaut. Shelf space shrunk, and the go-round was quietly retired. Kids barely noticed. Parents moved on. But years later, people still talk about them. About that flaky crust, that swirl of fruit, that sense that breakfast did not always have to come in a rectangle. You will not find them in stores. And Kellogg's has never hinted at a comeback. They remain frozen in memory, part of a past where innovation looked like a spiral, not a square. A better taste? Maybe, but not a better fit for the machine. It came in short, stubby containers. The texture was smooth, velvety, and rich. Not like the runny stuff most people associated with yogurt. This was custard style, creamy, decadent, almost dessert. And for a while in the 1980s, YoPlate custard-style yogurt was the gold standard of dairy indulgence. It was the grown-up snack for moms on the go, for teenagers trying to feel fancy, for anyone who wanted their yogurt to feel special. But then came the health craze. Suddenly, thick meant fattening. Creamy meant guilty. Greek yogurt showed up and changed everything. It was tart. It was authentic. It was better for you, or so we were told. YoPlate tried to pivot, but the custard line got pushed to the back. Eventually, it disappeared altogether. Quietly, like melting dessert. For those who remember, it is a sore spot. The yogurt aisle today is a battlefield of trends and promises, but none of them feel like that little custard cup. YoPlate custard style was indulgent without apology, and maybe that is what killed it. Or maybe we just forgot how to enjoy something simple and rich without feeling bad about it. It was not just dessert. It was dinner backup. The chocolate chip snackin' cake was a box mix from Betty Crocker that promised an all-in-one solution. Just add water, stir, and bake. What came out was a rich, moist cake dotted with chocolate chips, perfectly sized for kids coming home hungry. It was a staple of after-school snacking. You did not need frosting. You did not need effort. Just a pan and an oven and 30 minutes. Moms loved it. Kids devoured it. And for a time in the 1980s, it felt like this little secret weapon in the pantry. But times changed. Cake mixes lost their allure. Pre-packaged snacks took over. Microwavable treats and pre-sliced desserts made the humble snackin' cake look old-fashioned. It quietly disappeared from shelves. People did not even notice at first, but when they did, it hurt. It felt like losing a family tradition you never meant to abandon. The kind of snack that was made, not bought. A little slice of normal that told you everything was okay. Chocolate chip snackin' cake is gone. But the memory of warm kitchens and crumbs on napkins, that still lingers. They called it Pepsi AM, and it was supposed to change how Americans woke up. Instead of coffee, you would grab a can of soda, sweeter, colder, faster. It was 1989, and the soda wars were heating up, so Pepsi tried to claim the mornings. It had extra caffeine and a bolder flavor, a jolt meant to get your day started. But Americans were not buying it, literally. Something about cracking open a soda with your eggs and toast just felt wrong. Pepsi underestimated how ritual-bound breakfast really was. People were not just drinking coffee for caffeine, they were drinking it for comfort, for identity. Pepsi AM felt artificial, forced. It did not last a year. Shelves cleared, commercials stopped airing, and it became one of Pepsi's most forgettable gambles. But if you were around back then, you remember the buzz. You remember someone at school or work saying, "Have you tried the new breakfast soda?" And then, like a collective moment of clarity, we all said no. It is not that Pepsi AM tasted bad, it is that it had no soul. Morning routines are sacred, and no brand, no matter how caffeinated, can mess with that. There was magic in that first bite, a buttery shortbread cookie that cracked open to reveal a warm, gooey center of chocolate or peanut butter. Keebler Magic Middles were a staple of childhood snack time, a quiet little indulgence tucked into lunchboxes and after-school routines. They were soft, simple, and unforgettable. The magic came from the surprise. Most cookies showed you everything up front. Magic Middles made you wait. And somehow, that made it better. But as the 1990s pushed forward, snacking got louder. More neon, more extreme. Magic Middles began to look a little too humble. Keebler tried to reinvent itself, but Magic Middles did not make the cut. By the late 1990s, they vanished without a sound. Some fans did not even notice until it was too late. They went looking for that little burst of nostalgia and found empty shelves. Online petitions came years later, begging Keebler to bring them back. But nothing stuck. It was like the elves just packed up and moved on. Magic Middles were not flashy. They were not loud. But they were real. And that kind of quiet comfort? It is hard to sell in a world that needs every snack to scream. OK Soda was not really about soda. It was about irony, about branding, about being over it before you even tried it. Launched in the early 1990s but tested in the late 1980s, it was Coca-Cola's attempt to hijack Generation X. The gray can, the weird sketch art faces, the vague promises, it all felt like a parody of marketing. And that was the point. The soda itself tasted like a mix of orange, cola, and regret. But no one was drinking it for the flavor. They were drinking it to feel different, to not be like everyone else. Except that strategy backfired. People do not like to be marketed to while being told they are too smart for marketing. It is insulting. And in trying to be everything, OK Soda became nothing. Sales plummeted, shelves cleared, and Coca-Cola never spoke of it again. It became a cult relic, the kind of thing people buy on eBay just to prove it existed. But for those who remember, it is a reminder of what happens when a company thinks it can be cool just by saying so. OK Soda did not just fail, it exposed a lie. And that is why people still talk about it. You never bought Morning Funnies for the taste. You bought it for the box. Bright yellow, covered in classic comic strips like Dennis the Menace and Beetle Bailey, it turned breakfast into a Sunday paper. The idea was genius. Distract kids long enough to get some sugar into them before school. And for a hot second in the late 1980s, it worked. Kids tore into those boxes for the comics, not the cereal. Because the cereal, it was nothing special. Too sweet, a little stale, shapes that promised fun but delivered mush. Still, the box made it worth it. Parents bought it because it kept the table quiet. Kids kept it because it felt like reading instead of eating. But novelty has an expiration date. Once the comics were rereads, the excitement faded. And when people realized they did not actually like what was inside, Morning Funnies quietly disappeared. Ralston had tried to package joy and forgot to put flavor in the bowl. It was not the worst cereal ever made. It was just all surface. And in a world where cereal is comfort, that was not enough. Morning Funnies taught us a hard lesson. You can smile on the outside and still be empty inside. Imagine pouring soda into your coffee. That is the experiment Coca-Cola tried in the late 1980s during test runs, before officially releasing it as Coca-Cola Black in the 2000s. It was a strange blend of dark cola and coffee essence, a drink that was neither refreshing nor warm, just caffeinated and confused. The name had an accent mark, like it was trying too hard. And maybe it was. Black was marketed as sophisticated, international, sleek. But the taste? Most people described it as burnt sugar with a hint of dirt. It never found its audience. Coffee drinkers wanted real coffee. Soda fans wanted sweetness, not bitterness. In the end, Coca-Cola Black fell into the gap between two strong traditions and belonged to neither. It was pulled from shelves almost as quickly as it arrived. But what is more fascinating is how early Coca-Cola tried this idea, long before energy drinks became common. They saw the future. They just took the wrong path to get there. Black was bold, ambitious, and completely out of touch, like a tuxedo at a barbecue. And that is why no one really cried when it vanished. Some flavors are just better left in the lab. Mornings were never the same once Oatmeal Swirlers hit the shelves. A packet of syrupy fruit goo came with each pack of oatmeal, letting kids draw pictures before stirring it in. Stars, smiley faces, swirls. It was like edible art, and for a moment in the late 1980s, it made breakfast fun. The oatmeal itself was fine, warm, sweet, standard. But the swirl, that was everything. It gave you control. It made breakfast personal. Even when the taste faded, the memory of swirling your initials into oatmeal felt oddly important. It was not just food, it was 5 minutes of being the artist of your own morning. But it also made it sticky, messy. Parents grew tired of the sugar stains and half-used packets. Betty Crocker pushed hard, but the novelty wore off. In a world shifting towards simpler and faster, swirlers felt like a delay. And then came the health trends. Suddenly, fruit syrup was not real fruit, and oatmeal had to be heart-healthy, not fun. Swirlers disappeared quietly. No headlines, no send-off. But those who remember can still taste that artificial strawberry swirl. It is strange how something so small left such a lasting memory. Maybe because it gave you a little control in a world that rarely did. Oatmeal swirlers were messy, sure, but they were yours. They called it not bacon. That was the hook. Sizzling looked like bacon, sizzled like bacon, but was supposedly better for you. Less fat, leaner, smarter. And for health-conscious families in the 1980s, it seemed like a miracle. It had the right crunch, the right smell. The commercials promised satisfaction without guilt. But Sizzling never truly tasted like bacon. It was always just close enough to make you miss the real thing. It tricked your eyes, teased your nose, but your tongue always knew the difference. It was a stand-in that could never shake the feeling of being a substitute. And eventually, people stopped pretending. Bacon lovers wanted the real deal. Dieters wanted to cut meat entirely. Sizzling got caught in between. By the early 1990s, Kraft phased it out, quietly, almost shamefully. There are still people who swear by it, who miss it, who would stockpile it if it ever returned. But the truth is, Sizzling was a product of compromise. It asked us to settle, and for a time we did. But when it disappeared, nobody fought for it. Because deep down we knew. Bacon is not meant to be faked. Sizzling was a well-intentioned lie. And in the end, even lies with good hearts cannot hold up to truth. Kougall was a peanut butter with a secret. Actually, 4 secrets: banana, cinnamon, vanilla, and chocolate. These were the flavors Kraft tried to infuse into peanut butter jars in the 1970s and early 1980s. It was weird, it was wild, and for kids, it was magic. You would open the lid and see this glossy swirl that promised adventure. Peanut butter that tasted like dessert? Yes, please. But adults were not as convinced. The flavors were strange, the sweetness too much. It was the kind of product that felt like it was made by kids, for kids, with zero adult approval. That is probably why it was amazing, and also why it did not survive. And eventually, Kougall became more of a novelty than a necessity. Sales declined. Shelves made room for simpler spreads, and Kougall slipped away. You can still find the jars online, empty, dusty, relics of a time when food was fun first. People who remember Kougall do so with a kind of disbelief. Did that really exist? Did we really eat peanut butter that tasted like banana pudding? Yes, and it was glorious. It was breakfast rebellion, dessert in disguise. And when it disappeared, it took a little bit of childhood chaos with it. Kougall was not for everyone, but for the ones who got it, nothing else quite compares. They were tiny, hard, and packed with a punch. Tartan Tinies were the size of a pencil eraser, but hit your taste buds like a firework. Bright colors, sharp flavors, a snack you could pour into your hand by the dozen. They came in cardboard boxes that looked like props from a Candyland dream. In the 1980s, they were everywhere, until they were not. Willy Wonka's brand was built on magic and weirdness, but even that had its limits. In the late 1980s, Tartan Tinies were redesigned. A chewy version replaced the original. The texture changed. The charm vanished. They lost the satisfying crunch that made you feel like you were biting into pure childhood chaos. What replaced it was softer, quieter, and totally forgettable. Sales plummeted. People wanted the crunch, not the mush. And in trying to evolve, the candy lost itself. It was discontinued, mourned by no one until years later when nostalgia kicked in. Then the stories came. People remembering afternoons at the movies, hands full of tart and tinies, small candies with a big presence. They did not try to be anything more than what they were, fun, fast, and unforgettable, until someone decided they needed to be different. And just like that, they were gone. They stared at you with smiling cartoon faces. Two-tone cookies with little eyes and mouths baked right in. Giggles cookies were pure 1980s joy, the kind of snack that made you feel like someone had baked a cartoon into your lunch. The inside was cream, chocolate or vanilla. The outside was shortbread. Together, it worked. Not because it was the best cookie, but because it was fun. Kids loved them. The packaging popped, but Giggles had a problem. They were living in Oreo's world. Nabisco already owned the cookie aisle with its flagship brand. Giggles were cute, but Oreo was timeless. They were like the fun younger cousin everyone loved, but no one took seriously. Eventually, the grown-up brands came back to claim the shelf space. Slowly, shelf space shrank. Giggles got pushed down, then out. By the early 1990s, they were gone. No farewell, no rebrand, just erased. But the image of those smiling cookies stuck around. People remembered, people asked, and eventually they started wondering why something so fun had to fail. The truth? Sometimes fun is not enough. Sometimes legacy wins. And sometimes the thing you loved most was just a little too different for the world to keep. Giggles did what cookies should do. They made you smile. And that was all they ever needed to do. Hidden treasures sounded like magic. Tiny golden squares with fruit-flavored centers hidden inside, some with nothing at all. The idea was irresistible to kids. Every bite was a gamble. Would it be cherry, orange, grape, or just a dry crunch? It was part cereal, part game. Launched in 1988, Hidden Treasures came in a bold purple box with a cartoon explorer guiding you through breakfast. The first few spoonfuls were thrilling. Then came the letdown. The texture of the filling was strange, chalky, artificial. The joy of discovery quickly turned into disappointment, and every empty bite felt like a broken promise. It was a game that stopped being fun once the excitement wore off. Parents complained about the sugar, kids moved on, and despite the clever packaging, the excitement faded fast. General Mills gave it a short run, then quietly buried the treasure for good. Some remember it fondly, but not for the flavor, for the hope that maybe this time this spoonful would be different. Hidden Treasures promised wonder. What it delivered was a reminder that not everything shiny on the outside hides something sweet. Sometimes the mystery is better than the answer, and sometimes you never even find the treasure at all. Crystal Light felt like the future. Powdered drink mixes you stirred into water to make something guilt-free, sugar-free, and perfect for the fridge. But in the early days, some of the flavors were, let's say, adventurous. Tomato, orange pineapple, raspberry ice with a bitter afterbite. The promise was refreshment. The reality was confusion. The brand found loyal fans almost instantly, especially among dieters and health-conscious adults. But flavors like tomato were a gamble, and in most homes, they were a one-time mistake. Drinking them felt more like a dare than a treat. But those strange early flavors hit shelves hard and left just as quickly. You would pour in the packet, stir, sip, and then grimace. It tasted like you were being punished for wanting something sweet. Still, Crystal Light kept pushing. Some flavors stuck. Others vanished without a trace, replaced by safer bets like lemonade and peach tea. The brand survived, but the experiments did not. For those who lived through it, the memory of those awkward first sips still lingers. A time when you were told to enjoy something, but your mouth knew better. Crystal Light was about control, about better choices. But even the smartest brand has to learn what people will actually drink, and sometimes that means pouring a whole pitcher down the drain and pretending it never happened. Fruit Brute was loud. The box screamed with color, the werewolf mascot bared his fangs in a friendly snarl, and the cereal promised fruity marshmallow mayhem. It joined Count Chocula, Frankenberry, and Boo Berry as part of General Mills' monster cereal lineup. But while the others became Halloween icons, Fruit Brute was different. Its fruit flavor was vague, somewhere between citrus and cough syrup, and the marshmallows could not hide it. Kids wanted to love it. The werewolf was cool, the box was exciting. But you cannot build a legend on packaging alone, and even monsters need flavor to survive. It felt like you were being tricked into fun by a cereal that never earned its howl. So, in 1982, after just a few years on shelves, Fruit Brute vanished. Quietly. No finale, no farewell howl. It became a cult favorite among cereal collectors, boosted in part by a cameo in Quentin Tarantino films. That kept the legend alive, even if the cereal itself was dead. General Mills brought it back for limited runs, but it never stuck. Fruit Brute remains the one monster cereal that could not survive the sunlight. It is a reminder that even in a lineup of legends, one weak howl can be enough to send you into the shadows. Not every monster becomes a myth. The pitch was perfect. Take Swiss Miss pudding, freeze it, and turn it into a snack on a stick. No spoon, no cup, just grab and go. But then you bit into it, and it was weird. The texture was rubbery, the flavor muted. It was like eating cold chocolate-flavored glue. Kids expected ice cream, adults expected elegance. What they got was disappointment. It was a dessert that forgot what dessert was supposed to be, fun, rich, and satisfying. Instead, it was like biting into a science experiment that never made it past testing. Swiss Miss pudding bars tried to be convenient, fun, and different, but they never found their footing. You could not quite call them dessert, and they were too odd to replace pudding cups. So they lingered awkwardly in freezer aisles before vanishing completely. It is hard to find someone who remembers them fondly. Harder still to find someone who finished an entire box, but for a brief moment, they were everywhere. In commercials, in lunchboxes, in broken dreams of what pudding could become. Swiss Miss stuck to what worked after that, warm, creamy comfort in a cup, because not everything needs a stick, and not every idea deserves a second chance. Some flavors were just meant to stay in the fridge, not the freezer. They were supposed to change breakfast forever. Carnation breakfast bars were chewy, grainy, and dense, designed to give you a complete morning meal in just a few bites. For the overworked, the always late, the kids who hated cereal, this was the answer. Open the wrapper, eat, go. In the 1980s, they were everywhere. In vending machines, in backpacks, even in office drawers, hidden next to stale coffee. But something was always off. They tasted like vitamins, like oats soaked in multivitamins and guilt. There was nourishment, sure, but no joy, no warmth, no memory of a kitchen table. It felt like breakfast stripped of its soul, packaged in foil. They were filling, sure, but joyless. And as breakfast trends changed, toward protein shakes, smoothies, or back to real food, Carnation breakfast bars started to feel like a relic. By the 1990s, they disappeared. Their legacy is complicated. Some people still miss them. Others never want to taste that chalky flavor again. But for a while, they symbolized a new kind of morning, one where speed beat taste, where function beat form. Carnation tried to bottle breakfast into something you could eat in the car. And for a while, it worked. But eventually, people remembered that breakfast used to mean something, and a wrapped bar, no matter how convenient, could not hold that kind of weight. Before it made video game history, Coleco was just trying to survive. The Connecticut Leather Company, yes, that is what Coleco stood for, started with shoes and evolved into above-ground pools, plastic toys, and electronic gadgets. In the 1970s, it was everywhere, but it was never dominant, always chasing trends. Then came the video game boom. ColecoVision arrived and gave the company its first real taste of national success. The graphics were better, the games felt fresh. For a brief moment in the early 1980s, Coleco looked unstoppable. It felt like they had finally found their niche, a lane where they could lead instead of follow. But success came faster than the company could stabilize, but it did not last. The video game crash of 1983 hit like a hammer. Coleco overextended, banking on a market that evaporated almost overnight. It tried to pivot again, launching the Cabbage Patch Kids dolls, which sold in the millions. But lightning rarely strikes twice. Manufacturing problems, patent lawsuits, financial strain. By the end of the decade, Coleco was bankrupt, sold off, dismantled, and the dreams of a plastic empire turned to dust. For anyone who grew up in that era, Coleco was part of the magic, part of the joy, part of the fall. Fondue parties were peak 1960s sophistication, cheesy, communal, and irresistibly fun. Imported from Switzerland and embraced by American hostesses everywhere, fondue turned dinner into an event. Friends gathered around bubbling pots of melted Gruyere or Emmental, long forks in hand, dipping cubes of crusty bread into molten gold. It was interactive, slightly exotic, and made conversation flow almost as much as the wine. The fondue pot itself became a household item, sleek, colorful, often gifted at weddings. There were rules. Do not drop your bread in the pot, stir in a figure eight, and keep the cheese smooth. Some added white wine or garlic, others experimented with chocolate fondue for dessert. Either way, the evening was about more than food. It was about sharing, laughing, and leaning in, literally and socially. In an era that embraced kitsch and community, fondue was a perfect fit. It brought people together in a circle, turned dinner into performance, and gave every guest a role to play. Long before tapas or charcuterie boards, fondue was the original shareable meal. For those who remember the scent of wine and cheese wafting through a mid-century living room, it was a flavor and feeling that defined the times. Milk delivery boxes were part of the morning routine before grocery stores became the center of every neighborhood. In the 1960s, many American homes had a small metal box sitting just outside the front door or tucked near the back steps. Inside, the milkman would leave fresh glass bottles filled with whole milk, sometimes with cream floating at the top. It was a system built on trust and timing. Families left their empty bottles out at night, and by morning, new ones would appear, cold and ready for breakfast. The box was often insulated to keep the milk cool, and in the winter, the tops might freeze and push the cardboard caps up like little crowns. Kids raced to bring it in before it could spoil in the sun. Some deliveries even included extras: eggs, butter, cottage cheese, depending on the service. The clink of bottles in the early morning was a familiar sound, and the sight of the milkman pulling up in a white truck or on a three-wheeled cart was part of the rhythm of daily life. It was personal, reliable, and felt like a small luxury. Today, the boxes are mostly gone, rusting behind old homes or used as planters, but to those who remember, they represent a time when things felt simpler, more local, and a little more dependable, one delivery at a time. VIP's restaurant was the kind of place that never made the national spotlight, but ask anyone from Oregon or Washington and you'll hear the same thing. It was like Denny's, only better. Cozy booths with cracked faux leather seats, mugs of coffee that never emptied, and a menu that served breakfast all day like it was doing you a personal favor. It was the sort of spot where truckers, college students, and night owls all blended together under the warm hum of fluorescent lighting. You could walk in at 2 in the morning and still get a full plate of pancakes, bacon, and hash browns that tasted like home. There was nothing flashy about VIPs, but that was exactly its charm. It was consistent, comforting, and totally unbothered by the fast-moving world outside. In the late 1980s, Denny's swooped in and bought up most of the locations, rebranding them and replacing that unmistakable local flavor with something more corporate. But folks from the Pacific Northwest still remember the coffee-stained menus, the quiet clatter of forks, and the waitresses who called you Han without blinking. If VIPs was all about comfort and familiarity, our next stop decided to flip the script. With rotisserie chicken, celebrity backing, and a brief moment in the cultural sun thanks to one very famous sitcom. In the 1970s, Vivitar cameras were everywhere. They were not the fanciest, but they worked. They captured birthday parties, backyard barbecues, and road trips to Mount Rushmore. They were affordable, sturdy, and proudly American. For amateur photographers, Vivitar was a ticket to creativity. But behind the shutters and flashbulbs, the world was changing. Japan was coming fast with brands like Nikon, Canon, and Minolta. Their lenses were sharper, their designs sleeker, and their technology more advanced. Vivitar could not keep up. It tried to pivot, offering accessories, licensing deals, and budget versions of premium cameras. Every shelf they lost in a department store was one less memory they would help capture. They were not just losing market share, they were losing their place in the family album. But the market was ruthless. Film was expensive, competition was brutal, and Vivitar slowly fell out of focus. By the time digital cameras arrived, it was too late. What once filled shelves at Sears and Montgomery Ward now sat in garage sales and thrift stores. Forgotten. But ask anyone who grew up in the 1970s to show you their old photo albums. Odds are, a Vivitar helped make those memories. A camera might just be a tool, but for millions of Americans, Vivitar was how they remembered their lives. Twister was the game that got people off the couch and tangled in each other's limbs. Released in 1966, it came with a plastic mat covered in colored circles and a spinner that decided your next move. Left hand red, right foot green. Before you knew it, you were stretching across the mat in a precarious pose, face pressed against someone's knee, hoping no one slipped. It was silly, physical, and weirdly intimate. Some parents called it indecent. Some schools banned it. But kids loved it. So did teenagers. It broke the ice at parties, sparked laughter between siblings, and gave families something active to do together. It was as much about falling over as it was about winning. The rustle of the mat, the sound of giggles as someone toppled, the concentration in trying to stay upright, it was all part of the fun. Twister took no prep and delivered instant chaos. It did not care about strategy. It cared about balance, luck, and how far you could stretch without collapsing. And for many, it was the first time a game made you move, laugh, and fall down all in one messy, unforgettable moment. Datsun was everywhere in the 1970s. Sleek, reliable, affordable. The kind of car your neighbor drove, your cousin saved up for, and your dad secretly liked better than his American sedan. It was Japan's Trojan horse into the United States market, and it worked brilliantly. But success brought identity problems. Nissan, its parent company, wanted global consistency. They did not want to be Datsun in one country and Nissan in another. So in the early 1980s, the decision was made: rebrand. Slowly, Datsun vanished. The name was pulled from brochures, badges, and showrooms. And just like that, a brand that millions had trusted was gone. People were confused. Dealerships had to explain that Nissan and Datsun were the same. Some buyers walked away. The transition was rocky, and for a while, Nissan lost ground in the market it had fought so hard to win. Looking back, the choice makes sense. But it still feels like something was stolen. A name, a memory, a piece of the road. Arthur Treachers' fish and chips felt like someone dropped a British pub right into the middle of American suburbia, minus the beer and with a lot more deep frying. Named after the dapper English actor known for playing butlers in old films, this spot promised the classic British fish and chips experience, but with a crispy, golden American twist. The fish, flaky, crunchy, and always steaming. The chips, thick-cut fries that could double as a side or a meal, depending on how hungry you were. And do not forget the little tubs of malt vinegar that gave the whole meal a tangy kick. It was greasy comfort food at its finest, wrapped in paper and handed over with a wink. In its heyday, Arthur Treachers had hundreds of locations scattered across the country. It was the place for people who wanted something fried but just a little different than burgers or chicken. Over time, competition and changing tastes wore it down. Most locations shuttered, leaving only a handful hanging on. But for anyone who grew up with one nearby, the smell of fried cod and vinegar still triggers a flood of memories. And speaking of memories, the next place on our list serves them up by the tray with old-school charm, a flat-top grill, and a name that still rings out across the Midwest. The Pontiac Aztec was a disaster in the early 2000s, but its roots stretch back to the 1970s. Back then, car designers were quietly sketching new ideas, crossovers, hybrid shapes, something between a van and an SUV. The oil crisis had made the auto industry rethink everything. What if utility and economy could live in the same shell? Those early concepts never left the drawing board, but they stayed in the shadows, mutating over time. Somewhere between vision and reality, the design lost its soul. What rolled out of the factory felt more like compromise than innovation. And when the market finally seemed ready for something different, Pontiac pulled the trigger. What came out was the Aztec. It was bold. It was weird. It was ahead of its time, and somehow behind it. The angles were wrong. The plastic cladding was cheap, and the name sounded like a dare. Consumers recoiled, sales tanked, and Pontiac, already in trouble, never really recovered. But behind the jokes, behind the Breaking Bad memes and design flops, there was something sad about it all. The Aztec was born from good intentions, from a desire to break the mold and recapture relevance. Instead, it became a punchline. Proof that even bold ideas, especially bold ideas, can fail spectacularly. Leet Breet turned a dark room into a glowing gallery. Introduced by Hasbro in 1967, this toy was unlike anything else at the time. It featured a black screen lit from behind and a box of tiny colored pegs, red, green, blue, orange, that you pushed through holes to create luminous designs. You could trace pre-printed templates or freestyle your own masterpiece. A clown's grin, a sailboat at sunset, your own name glowing like a neon sign. The warmth from the light bulb behind the screen gave it a cozy feeling, and the soft glow made your room feel like magic. It was quiet play, patient play, the kind where your tongue stuck out in concentration and the world around you disappeared. Parents loved that it was mess-free. Kids loved that they were in control. Once finished, you sat back in the dark and admired your work, a tiny artist with your own spotlight. Over time, more templates arrived, cartoon characters, animals, seasonal themes. But even with no pattern at all, the effect was the same. A toy that made you feel like a creator. In a world before screens lit up everything, Light Bright let you light up something of your own, one peg at a time. Beefsteak Charlie's did not want you to just eat. They wanted you to feast. This was the kind of place that dared you to come hungry, then dared you again to leave room for dessert. Their tagline was, "You're gonna get spoiled," and honestly, they meant it. With a full salad bar, all-you-can-eat shrimp, and unlimited sangria, beer, and wine, it was less a dinner and more a challenge. The vibes? Equal parts wood-paneled steakhouse and slightly buzzed family reunion. People went for birthdays, promotions, divorces, any excuse to eat until your waistband begged for mercy. And the food? Surprisingly solid. The steak was not exactly filet mignon, but it hit the spot. The shrimp came fast and endless. And the bread? Warm, crusty, and forgettable. But who was there for bread? Beefsteak Charlie's rode the wave of 80s extravagance until the bottom line caught up with them. Too much generosity and not enough foot traffic sealed its fate. But in its heyday, it was a buffet fever dream come to life. So if you thought that was decadent, just wait. The next restaurant stripped the glitz and turned hot dogs and tacos into a Southern California classic, with a name that only made sense once you saw the menu. Television commercials in the 1960s were more than just breaks between shows. They were cultural events in miniature. With only a few channels and no fast-forward buttons, families watched together as jingles and catchphrases embedded themselves in the national memory. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz. You already know the rest. These ads had staying power. Cereal mascots danced across the screen. Soap commercials turned kitchens into laboratories. And toy ads? They were irresistible. From Slinky to Mr. Potato Head, Kids begged for whatever had just aired during Saturday morning cartoons. Commercials were peppy, earnest, and often downright charming. They starred smiling housewives, enthusiastic children, and baritone narrators who made even laundry detergent sound heroic. These were the years when brands did not just sell products. They sold a lifestyle, a vision of modern convenience and happiness. Parents trusted what they saw. Kids repeated the jingles under their breath. Even decades later, people can still sing along to a tune they heard once before dinner in 1966. Commercials from the 1960s did not just advertise. They became part of family rhythm, part of shared language, and part of what made the television glow a little brighter after each show. Clark Equipment Company once helped build America. Its construction vehicles, forklifts, and loaders were staples on job sites across the country. From highways to factories, if something big was being built, Clark was likely there. The brand stood for toughness and reliability. But the 1970s brought headwinds. Inflation climbed, industrial jobs declined, foreign competitors offered cheaper alternatives, and Clark, heavy with overhead and tradition, struggled to pivot. Its innovation slowed, its market share shrank. Machines once seen as symbols of progress started to look like dinosaurs. You could still find them in use, but fewer every year. Workers were laid off. Plants closed. By the 1980s, it was a name people remembered, not one they relied on. Pieces of the company were sold, reorganized, absorbed. What remained was a fragmented legacy. Ask a retired construction worker or a union foreman from the era, and they will nod. They will remember the green machines, the noise, the muscle. Clark Equipment Company did not just lose customers, it lost relevance. And in the business of building, that is the one thing you cannot rebuild. Lums was born from a hot dog stand and became something like a fever dream of mid-century Americana meets tiki bar chic. Founded in Miami, this oddball restaurant chain made a name for itself with its signature beer-steamed hot dogs. Yes, beer-steamed. It sounds weird until you try it. The result was a hot dog with just a hint of hoppy goodness, nestled in a bun that soaked it all up like a sponge. But Lums was more than just its dogs. It had fried clams, tiki drinks, and decor that made you feel like you had wandered into a vacation. Palm fronds, bamboo, and plastic parrots set the tone. The vibe was easygoing, slightly eccentric, and always a little bit boozy, even if you were just there for the onion rings. At its peak, Lums had hundreds of locations, including one right on the Las Vegas Strip. But as the 80s rolled on, the novelty wore off and the chain dwindled. Still, if you ever sat down at Lums with a giant menu, a plate of clams, and a tall frosty mug, you know it had a strange magic. But if Lums was all about weird combinations, the next place made celebrations the main course, with parades, sirens, and a dessert so big they dared you to finish it. Ginos Hamburgers was a mid-Atlantic icon. With its bold red signs and sports tie-ins, it stood out in a crowded fast food landscape. Kids loved the burgers, adults loved the prices, and everybody loved the connection to football legend Gino Marchetti, who co-founded the chain after retiring from the NFL. It was fast, friendly, and local. In cities like Baltimore and Philadelphia, it was as common as traffic. But Ginos had ambitions beyond the region. It wanted to go national. What felt like a hometown treasure did not always translate outside the neighborhood. The farther it spread, the more it lost the charm that made it matter. The problem was the rest of the country already had their go-to burger joints: McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. Ginos tried to differentiate. It added Kentucky Fried Chicken to its menu through a partnership. It redesigned stores. But growth was slow. The charm that worked in Baltimore did not translate in California. By the 1980s, Marriott had bought the chain and converted most of the locations into Roy Rogers. Just like that, Ginos was gone. The buildings changed, the signs came down, and a local legend faded into memory. But for those who grew up with it, Ginos was never just a burger. It was home. Space food sticks were NASA's answer to snacking, and the 1960s answer to cool. Developed with the help of the space agency and manufactured by Pillsbury, these chewy, tube-shaped snacks were inspired by the meals eaten aboard spacecraft during America's race to the moon. They came in flavors like chocolate, peanut butter, and caramel, each one individually wrapped in sleek foil packaging that looked straight out of a science fiction movie. For kids, biting into a space food stick meant pretending you were floating in zero gravity, eating like an astronaut in orbit. They were soft, dense, and slightly grainy. Less candy bar, more futuristic fuel. Parents loved the idea of a high-protein, shelf-stable snack. Kids just liked the novelty. They made it into lunchboxes, road trip bags, and even Halloween candy stashes. Though their popularity waned by the 1980s, the memory stuck, especially for those who watched grainy broadcasts of moonwalks and then unwrapped their own little taste of space. Today, space food sticks are remembered more for what they represented than how they tasted. They were not just snacks. They were a bite of the future, wrapped in foil, waiting in your kitchen drawer. Steak and Ale was the go-to place for when you wanted to feel fancy, but still be home in time to catch a rerun of Magnum P.I. With its dark wood Tudor-style decor, stained glass windows, and hushed lighting, it gave off the vibe of a medieval inn, if the inn served salad bars and prime rib. You walked in and immediately felt like you were somewhere upscale. Maybe not five-star fine dining upscale, but mom's wearing lipstick and dad ironed his shirt upscale. The menu was packed with classics: sirloin steak, grilled salmon, baked potatoes as big as your head, and those tiny warm rolls that you could never get enough of. It made you feel like royalty, piling your plate high before the main course even arrived. For Middle America, Steak and Ale was the perfect blend of classy and casual. But while it may have been your parents' date night choice, the next place on our list was for the open road, the brightly colored beacon of every interstate exit, and the last orange-roofed symbol of a family vacation. Esprit was not just fashion. It was a feeling. Youthful, bright, alive. The brand captured a moment when clothes were not just about style, but about saying something. About the world, about identity, about freedom. In the 1970s and 1980s, Esprit exploded across America. Their catalogs were works of art. Their stores were full of color and energy. It felt like the future. You walked into Esprit and felt like the main character in your own story. It was clothes for the bold, not just the fashionable. But fashion moves fast. By the 1990s, trends were changing. Grunge came in, minimalism followed, and Esprit's cheerful aesthetic felt out of place. Management changed, expansion overreached, and what once felt vibrant now felt dated. Sales dipped, stores closed. By the early 2000s, Esprit in the United States was nearly extinct. It survived in Europe and Asia for a while longer, but the magic had faded. For a certain generation, Esprit was the brand they wore to school dances, to mall hangouts, to first dates. It was more than fabric. It was memory, stitched into every sleeve. Now it is a whisper from a closet that no longer opens. Operation was not just a game, it was a test of nerves. Released by Milton Bradley in 1965, this battery-operated board game turned you into a surgeon, operating on a cartoonish patient named Cavity Sam. He lay there in his hospital gown, wide-eyed and helpless, with little cavities holding ailments like a funny bone, a wishbone, or a Charlie horse. The goal? Use tweezers to remove each piece without touching the metal edges of the cavity. If you slipped even slightly, the board buzzed loudly and Sam's red nose lit up. That buzz? It haunted dreams. Kids would wince, laugh, and shout all at once. The challenge was as much about steady hands as it was about keeping calm under pressure. Operation was competitive, silly, and oddly tense. You might remember tilting the board to cheat or holding your breath during a particularly tricky extraction. It was often pulled out during family game night, and even adults found themselves sweating over the tiny butterfly in the stomach. Operation was more than a toy. It was an experience, a rite of passage. And the first time many kids learned that success sometimes comes down to keeping a steady hand. Long before Auntie Anne's took over shopping malls with that sweet almond glaze and cinnamon sugar swagger, there was Hot Sam Pretzels. This place was the original mall pretzel joint. The smell hit you like a buttery wall the moment you walked in. Their pretzels were big, doughy, salty, and piping hot. Perfect for tearing apart with your bare hands in between trips to the arcade and the food court. What made Hot Sam special was that it felt like it had always been there. You never planned to go to Hot Sam. You just walked past, caught a whiff, and suddenly you were standing in line. The classic salted pretzel was the favorite, but if you were bold, you went for the cheese-stuffed or even the jalapeno variety. They did not have 20 sauces or dipping cups. They had mustard. That was it. And it was glorious. Eventually, the brand got merged with Pretzel Time, and later, Auntie Anne's took over the pretzel game for good. But for kids of the 80s, Hot Sam was the flavor of an afternoon well spent. Speaking of things that left a taste and a legacy, our next stop is a little more complicated. A pancake house turned national chain, now remembered as much for controversy as it is for maple syrup. If one of these forgotten favorites brought back a taste you almost lost to time, tell us your story in the comments. Give this video a like if you missed the good stuff, and subscribe so you never lose the next memory.